you know that you found a place with good chicken wings when someone tries to hold you up for your wings on the way out the door. And you won't give them up unless they prove they have a gun.
You're listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek.
In the Fight Out House at Washington University in the late 1980s, if you were hungry and it was late, the next stop was London and Sons. So London and Sons was east on Delmar. There were actually three of them in the St. Louis area. The one on Delmar was in the safest neighborhood, I'm going to say, because the other two were really sketchy. And we had plenty of friends who would never go to London's, even if there were two or three of us going, because they were so nervous about the area. And it was a rundown area, and it was definitely low income. Never had any significant trouble. London's, it was just a wing house. They sold soul food, chicken wings, cheese fries. That was the big favorite. Chicken livers, gizzards, everything you ordered came with fries in the box and a roll in the box. And on one occasion, finals week, there were two of us, Denny and myself. Denny's a year older than me. I'm guessing we didn't have a final the next day because we seemed to be much more relaxed than everybody else. And somebody offered to pay for our Londons if we made the run to get there. So Denny had a car. He drove. I rode shotgun. It was just the two of us. We went to London's. The hilarious thing about London and Sons is that you paid through what amounted to be a bulletproof glass teller's window. And when you slid down the building to where they gave you the food, and you waited there. And the only thing in the whole restaurant was a steel rail, like a made out of pipe, that divided the people who were waiting from the people who were ordering food or picking up. And the area where you picked up the food was two other pieces of bulletproof glass that were mounted so that they kind of, one went down a little low and one went a little high. So you had to reach up to get your food, and they would reach down to hand it to you. And that was the closest you came to physical contact with the people working at London and Son. So, typically when we would go, if you go on a Friday or Saturday night, there'd be a dozen people there, and everybody would probably be drunk. And, as I said, we never really had any problems, but there was always a 3-card Monte game going on in one corner of that little room when you were ordering your food. And we knew a lot of people who lost a lot of money just waiting to pick up their wings. But so Denny and I ordered. I think we were ordering for about 4 or 5 people. We paid, we waited, we got our 2 bags, and we left the building. And at that time, there were probably only 3 or 4 people in there, because it was, like I said, it was like a Wednesday or Thursday night. And as we walked out, we walked toward his car, which was parked right in front. A little dude followed behind us. And as Denny went around the car to the driver's side and I approached the passenger side, he said, "Hey." And I turned around and looked at him, and I must outweigh this guy by like 80 pounds. And he walked closer to me, and he had both hands in his coat pockets. And he says, "Hey, give me your wings." I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm not giving you my wings." And then he lifted up his right hand while it was still in the pocket and pointed at me and said, "Give me your wings, motherfucker, or I'm going to shoot you." And I wasn't drunk, by the way. My immediate response was, "Let me see the gun." And he would not. He just started yelling more shit. Denny, meanwhile, his eyes were as big as saucers, and he starts to slide into the car and start it. I'm like, "I am not giving you my wings until you show me that gun." And I was sure he didn't have a gun, except for the fact that I thought, he might have a gun. He would not show it. I opened the door. I jumped in as quick as I could. Denny was backing out of there, out of the parking lot, spinning, basically pulling a whole shot to get out of there before I even had the door closed, and then tore down Delmar. So that's my favorite London story. But I don't know how many you have, but I have a million of them.
So I only have one, because I was never a big London's, not that I wasn't a fan. I've just never been a huge wings fan. Seems like a lot of work to eat a little bit of meat. So, but it was probably a weekend night because the place was packed, and you guys must have taken me. And I know for a fact that I'd had several drinks. So I waited in the line forever behind that steel bar, like you said, go up to the first bulletproof window. You've described the situation and people's uneasiness at times in there. And I was
Right.
just so clueless. And the phone rings in the back, and without missing a beat, and I'm just describing because I remember it so well, I said, "Hey, if that's for me, I'm not here." and, and the lady looked at me like I was insane. And she just shook her head like, stupid ass white boy, just, and you guys are all, you'd already ordered and you were down at the other end and you guys just busted out laughing. And I wasn't even really trying to be funny. Like I wasn't sitting there.
That's just drunk Chris right there.
Yeah, it just happened. And so
Oh, that's
that's my
awesome.
London and Son story.
Well, one of the funny that we always used to say is that whenever we ordered Londons, as I said, typically the classic order was a 5-piece cheese on the fries, and it'd come in a cardboard box. The bottom would be soaked with hot sauce by the time you actually got around to someplace where you could sit down and eat it. But they would always put a roll in there, and it invariably every person in our group would open up the box, pick out the roll, and it would be smashed all to hell. And we were convinced that the people in the back who, they could give a shit about us, and, they worked really hard back there, I'm sure. And we were always obnoxious and at least loud. And, we all thought we were hilarious. And we started referring to them as white guy rolls because we were sure every roll they put in a box that they knew was coming to our group, they would just smash the shit out of the roll before they handed it to us. So I never had a roll that was roll shaped. It was always flat.
I don't remember my role, but I can guarantee it was flat.
But that was, I learned about London and Sons from a guy who was in our fraternity, who I played football with, who was 1 year older than me. And he didn't discover London's. He was just one in a long line of people passing down the traditions. But his nickname was Dupu. And I can remember when the first time he took me to London and Sons, he said, "Dude, I'm taking you to a shrine." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Every city has at least one shrine, man. And St. Louis's shrine is London and Sons Wing House." And he took me that night. And again, we were probably half in a bag. It was probably midnight or after that. And we picked up the wings. We went back to the house, and we were just, you got sauce all over your face and cheese all over the carpet. And I looked at him and I said, "This is my favorite restaurant ever." And I took it to heart. And I've always considered every at least major city has at least one shrine that you have to visit. And that is it. I don't know exactly how to define it other than to say it's not a fine dining establishment. It's usually where you want to go after you've been drinking, but it has its own flavor. It has its own personality.
The shrine that I'm most familiar with is I grew up in Cincinnati, Skyline Chili. And so you have the debate between what's better, Skyline and Gold Star. And it was no contest as far as I'm concerned. Gold Star had a lot of the sponsorships for the Reds and the Bengals. But Skyline was the place you wanted to go to after a night out. There was one I remember right off campus at University of Cincinnati. We'd go down to Clifton to their area where they had all the bars for students and stuff. And you just go over there. And for those who aren't familiar, Skyline is a chili. But the big thing that they make is conies. So it's these tiny little hot dogs
So good.
and the same size buns. And you can have it multiple ways, like, 3-way, 4-way, 5-way. And all that meant was you were adding different ingredients. Onions, cheese always came on it. And
Cheese.
I don't know
Oh my
how they
God,
shredded
cheese.
that cheese, but it was the most finely shredded cheese you'd ever have in your life. You could just grab that
It was
stuff.
like a cloud.
Yeah, it was awesome. Some folks would have it on spaghetti. The other thing that you would do at Skyline, which was just so weird, I never got into it, they'd always serve it with the little oyster crackers, and they'd have hot sauce at the tables, and people would poke a little hole, fill the oyster cracker with hot sauce, and just pop it in their mouth. That was my first introduction to hot sauce, which I've become a big fan of, but still didn't totally love that because the Skyline conies were just the best. And nowadays you can find ripoff recipes anywhere. But at one point, my grandmother dated someone who was high up in Skyline and got the recipe. passed it on to my mom, and she guarded that thing. That was probably the most valuable thing we had in our house.
No shit, I never heard that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and we'd make it a couple times. It was good. I mean, it was pretty damn close.
I know at least once in my life I've sworn that I'm going to be buried in a Skyline chili parlor. And a lot of people hate it because it's not like Tex-Mex chili. It has a completely different flavor. But my favorite recollection of Skyline was I was in law school summer after my second year, and I was living and working in Pittsburgh. And my wife, Dawn, was working for the summer in St. Louis. And I flew back to St. Louis, or drove back to St. Louis once to visit her over the summer. She came out to Pittsburgh once to visit me. And then once we decided to meet more or less halfway. So we met I actually think it was Columbus, but I found out there was a Skyline Chili near where we were in Columbus. I don't think there were a lot outside of Cincinnati, but there was this one. And we spent basically 3 days and 2 nights, but I am not kidding you. We went to Skyline Chili and ate for 5 meals. We ate there 5 times in 3 days. And I would do it again in a heartbeat, man. I love that cheese. I love that chili. I haven't had it for a while now.
And I think what makes not only Skyline, but other shrines like that is you can't really describe why it's so good. I mean, you can try to. Like you said, a lot of people are like, this isn't chili. It's like, no, it's Skyline. And
Right.
like if you try to defend it, the best defense is just try it because the shit's good.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these places, at least for you and me, I think there's like some kind of imprint that's made, and it's made when you're drunk. So
yeah.
The first time you have it, you're drunk, you think it's like manna from heaven. But then you develop a taste for it. And I can tell you easily the last 10 times I had London and Sons, for example, before they shut down completely, I was stone cold sober. So, and the same way with Skyline. We ate at Skyline not too many years ago. We had the kids and we were driving back through Ohio from somewhere. And we knew there was a Skyline nearby. We found it, and my kids loathed it. They hated it. And I was like, that's fine. Give me your Coney. I will finish that. But St. Louis had another one that I wanted to bring up, only because I don't know if you ever went there. There's a place called the Eat Right Diner, and it's in the city of St. Louis. It was east and south of campus. It wasn't a campus hangout at all, although I found out about it from, I'm sure, somebody else at school. And it was just a 24-hour diner. But it was a tiny little place. And in fact, I found a picture of it that I'm going to get to you and we'll put up on the website when the time comes. And I actually have a print. Somebody did a painting of it, like a watercolor painting of the Eat Right. And that's hanging in the kitchen of my house right now. But the Eat Right was just one of those places where, again, you go after a night of drinking, maybe down on the landing on your way back back west towards St. Louis. And it just felt like 1940. It was tiny, little stools. There were no tables and chairs, as far as I know. It was just stools around fixed stools around a little bar. And it probably only held about, I don't know, 20 people. So, you'd show up at 2 a.m. and you'd have to wait for 10 minutes or 15 minutes until somebody cleared out. And they would serve breakfast all day, all night, that kind of thing. So it was just a great place to go if you'd been out drinking for the night. So that was my second favorite shrine coming out of St. Louis.
So as far as diners, yes, I agree that they are just a great place to go, especially late at night. However, whenever I hear of diners, I can't help but think of John Mulaney's skit or his routine where they played What's New Pussycat like 21 times in a row.
That's my
just the way he describes all the people who are on edge and just kind of weird in the diner, and then how doing that to him just totally set him off. And then the people that work there were like, yep, just another night. You couldn't rattle them no matter what. So I don't know. There's something, as soon as you started talking about the diner, I was like, what is the name of that routine? So it's the Salt and Pepper Diner for folks who want to check that routine out by John Mulaney.
That's a great recommendation. He's funny. I love John Mulaney. I've seen him live once. I took my daughter, I think, for her birthday because she's a big John Mulaney fan. But that is probably his all-time classic bit. I love that. Yeah, there was another diner I thought of when I was trying to come up with a list of shrines, and it, as opposed to being in a major city, there's a place called Bill's Toasty, and this goes out to our friend Andy because it's located in Taylorville, Illinois, on what they call the Square. And, it's not a place that was open 24 hours because I don't think anything in Taylorville was open past like 9 o'clock. But they were famous for their cheese balls. And it was like cheddar cheese cubes deep fried. And I can remember going to visit him once when we were at school. And he just raved about going to Bill's Toasty. He was like, we got to stop. We got to cruise the square and we got to eat at Bill's Toasty before we go. And you know what? It was worth it. It was definitely a worthwhile stop.
You've never taken me there either, man. I'm starting to feel a little deprived.
Yeah. Well, what we need to do, and you're on the East Coast. My daughter graduates college in Philadelphia in May, and maybe I'll drag your ass up to Philly because Philadelphia's shrines, and there are multiple ones, but their thing, of course, is the cheesesteak, and I'm a sucker for a Philly cheesesteak. And I have a good friend here. He's actually a musician up here in the Joliet area who grew up in kind of a rough neighborhood outside of Philly. And so when I first took Anna out for school, I asked him what he recommended because I know about Jim's and Pat's. Those are the places that are fairly easy to find and everybody knows about. And he told me, you got to go to Steve's Prince of Steaks. And I don't care. I've been there. I've been there like 3 times now, and their cheesesteaks are phenomenal, but I would go back only because of the name. And again, I may have a photograph somewhere of me standing in front of the Steve sign, but Steve's Prince of Steaks in Philly is definitely a shrine and way off the beaten path. And I think that's one of the other things about a shrine is it can't be easy to find. But what's really funny about that is Dawn and I have to sneak out to go get cheesesteaks when we visit Anna because she hates them. She will not go to a cheesesteak place. And if you go to a restaurant that has them and we order them, she looks at us with disgust. She thinks they're the grossest thing you've ever seen.
And I had somebody who lived in Philly take me, and I can't for the life of me remember who it was, and they took me to one of the shrines. And I like Philly cheesesteaks, but I was so confused when they were asking me, but basically they're asking me if I wanted cheese whiz on it. I think they said whiz on that. And I'm like, what?
You're gonna what now?
Yeah. And I finally looked at what they were pointing at. I'm like, yeah, I want the cheese whiz.
That may be another part of the definition, right? There's always a special vocabulary when you go, because London's, you always just ask for the 5-piece with cheese. You don't have to say everything. And of course, I live near Chicago. Chicago is jam-packed with shrines, but the one that I want to bring up is probably my favorite hot dog joint in the whole world, and that's the Wiener Circle, which is up outside of Wrigleyville. I believe Dupu may have turned me on to the Wiener Circle as well. My first visit there may have been on a trip up to Chicago with a bunch of those guys. It's a hot dog place. It's Vienna hot dogs, but there's this radioactive green relish they put on it, and they sell what they call charred cheddar dogs, and they've got great cheese on them. And none of this stuff is healthy, of course. But one of the great things, if you go to the Wiener Circle on a Friday or Saturday night late after you've been drinking, the people who work there, especially the ladies behind the register, will just abuse you endlessly. They will call you names and tell you to hurry up. And it's part of the entertainment, I swear. My favorite time, the first time I ever took Dawn to Wiener Circle, we stepped up to the register, and this woman behind the register took one look at Dawn and said, "What you want, Barbie?" And I couldn't even order after that. I was laughing so hard.
And I'm pretty sure you took me to Wiener Circle one time after we were drinking. I don't even remember what I ate, so that may have been a pretty rough night for us. But it was good, my recollection.
Pretty limited menu though. It had cheese on
probably
it
hot dog.
And relish. Whatever you ate, I'm sure it had that on it.
I think one of the other things about the shrine is you also plan, like certain cities, you go there and you plan your visits around. So I don't remember if it's when I came into town. Oh, I came into town for a conference, and you and I met up. You picked me up at the airport. I had a conference at the University of Chicago, and you picked me up. And I knew the one thing I knew is we were going to go to Giordano's and get some Chicago style pizza.
If you were with me, you were definitely going to.
Yeah, that's where I'm sure that's where you took me. I do remember that meal. That was fantastic, and I love Chicago style pizza.
Yeah, that's the one where you eat one piece and it weighs about 2 pounds, and then you eat that second piece because it's so good, and then you can't move for 3 days. The other place that I believe has a couple great shrines that people might not recognize is Pittsburgh. I grew up near Pittsburgh, on either side of it, kind of. I grew up in West Virginia for a long time, 8 years there, and a couple years in Western PA, about 2 hours east of Pittsburgh. But there are 2 great shrines there. One of them is closed now and just closed in the last 5 years. And it was always called the O, but it was the original hot dog. And it was this giant restaurant. It was like a 2-story place. And there may have been more than one, but the first one, the original one, was right near Pitt's campus. As with most of these places, you know, they're kind of, their lifeblood is the college kids who go drinking and then go want to eat afterwards. But the O is, again, just a hot dog joint, but they had the best cheese fries I've ever had in my life. Their hot dogs were okay, but you went for the cheese fries. And as a matter of fact, the other place I was going to mention is pretty famous, and you'll hear it mentioned on NFL broadcasts every once in a while. It's a place called Primanti Brothers. The Primanti has its own version of a cheesesteak, but it's nothing like a Philly cheesesteak. Basically, it's a steak sandwich on a bun where they also put the slaw and the French fries, and everything else are all under a bun, or under pieces of bread, I should say. And I think the original Primanti Brothers was in the Garment District in Pittsburgh, near one of the rivers, Monongahela, I think. Anyway, it just was around forever and eventually became a place where all these drunk college kids would go to. And then they opened up one. When I lived and worked in Pittsburgh, there was one in Oakland, which is where the University of Pittsburgh is. So what I would do with a buddy of mine who grew up in Pittsburgh is we would go to the O, we would order cheese fries, and then we would take them and walk them down the street and get a cheesesteak from Primanti Brothers. And we would eat cheese fries from the O and a cheesesteak from Primanti Brothers outside of both restaurants. The other town or the other city that is just chock full of shrines is New Orleans. I've professed my love for New Orleans in the past. And what's funny about New Orleans, I can name some nicer restaurants that I would recommend in a heartbeat for you to go to, sit down places, some of them upscale, some of them not necessarily, but still, not what I would call a shrine, not this kind of low key, grab it to go kind of place that these other shrines are like. But there's a million of them. And I've eaten in, dozens of places that I couldn't tell you the name of, and had like the best po' boy I ever had in my life, or the best jambalaya. And it's just, everywhere you turn, the food is fantastic in New Orleans. So I can't name a specific place, but close your eyes and spin around, you're going to find one for sure.
Totally agree. And I've gone there a couple times and I couldn't name a single restaurant. What I can remember is having coffee and chicory for the first time in New Orleans. And I've tried it since, and it's not very good, but it was awesome down there.
Yeah, the one place when I go to New Orleans, it's been a while now, I don't spend a lot of time in the French Quarter. It's kind of like going to Clark Street in Chicago or whatever. It's a lot of tourists go there. That doesn't mean there aren't great places to go, and there's certainly great food to be eaten there. But there is a little kind of grocery store / deli that is on the edge of the quarter, called Central Grocer. And they make the best muffulettas I've ever had in my life. And, I don't know if technically that's a shrine. It's definitely not open late, but it is worth a stop in New Orleans. If there's a non kind of sit down restaurant I would recommend, it would be Central Grocery.
I wouldn't be doing it justice if I didn't at least mention North Carolina. Sort of like New Orleans, I don't have a specific place to recommend, but North Carolina is kind of unique in that we have this divide between types of barbecue. So Eastern North Carolina barbecue is a vinegary based, sort of very thin sauce, got that the bite to it. I'm actually not a huge fan, even though I'm in the Eastern Carolina side. West Carolina is much more of a tomato based, which is much more traditional. So that's more the type that I prefer, having not come from, but the Midwest, I think you're a little bit more used to like a Kansas City type of barbecue. But people pick sides, and there are definitely restaurants that serve both. But some of the best, you'll see these little shacks along the side of the road, and that they're probably serving just, the best barbecue because they got big old lines. They look like concession stands at Little League baseball parks, but they'll have big old lines of people just waiting for the barbecue and the hush puppies and whatever else they get, those really healthy meals.
Yeah, that sounds really good though, man. That's a reason to visit right there. Well, that's our summary, I think, of some shrines and discussion of the concept of a food shrine, as far as we're concerned. this is a good time, I think, to point out that we have an email address that you can send us comments and questions, which is thirdsongin@gmail.com. I would love to hear from listeners, particularly if we missed one. I'd like to hear about some other shrines, both to see if there's things I knew about that I forgot, and more importantly, if it's a new place to go, I'd love to check it out. So if you email us, tell us a city and a shrine that we missed, we will talk about it most likely at one of our later podcasts.
All right, and that brings us to a question from the listener. We have one from Jonathan in High Town, New Mexico. Jonathan wants to know, what is your favorite thing to order at a shrine?
Well, you want to go first?
Yeah, because mine's easy. The Skyline Coney.
There it is.
That is the one thing, I miss it. There's no replicating it. There's no place around me that makes it. I know at some point Skyline expanded. I think I went to one in Florida, and this may make no sense, but it didn't taste the same. I mean, it's just, there's something about Skyline in Cincinnati and their ability to do whatever it is they do with that cheese. It's just my favorite thing. And I could eat, I'm not a huge, I could actually eat the same thing every day for lunch. I eat peanut butter sandwiches many, many days in a row. So food doesn't always, stand out as a luxury for me, but Skyline chili conies, I could probably eat 10 in one sitting, mainly because I know that I probably won't go back again for a while.
That's funny. I was just going to correct you because what you first said was a Skyline Coney. I'm like, well, you're wrong because nobody eats one Skyline Coney. And that I got to tell you, that was a close runner-up for me. And I may have avoided it only because I kind of assumed that was going to be your answer. But I'm going to say the most interesting and one of my favorite meals to order was from the Eat Right diner in St. Louis, and it was called the Nightmare. And it was eggs, any style. I would always get them over easy for some reason, which is not how I usually eat my eggs. Eggs, hash browns, bacon, completely covered in chili. And if there was a meal to eat after you've been drinking all night, it was a Nightmare. And that's why I went to the Eat Right the very first time I went, was everybody's like, we're going to get Nightmares, baby. And it is one of the most standout meals I can possibly imagine from a shrine. Unexpected from a little diner like that. And you'd be there at 1 a.m. You look down the row at the counter you're eating at, and there'd be 10 people and 8 of them would be eating Nightmares. It was really gross, but it was awesome.
Dude, I want to see you at 10 o'clock the next morning.
Well, these days I wouldn't be up until noon, but it didn't sit well. I'm not saying the next day was great, but when hell, we were 20 something, man. We could process anything at that point. So I think the next segment we were going to approach was our recommendations. Every episode we try to make recommendations from then and from now. We've defined then as being anything before 2000. We initially started talking about stuff right around when we were going to school, when we were living together as roommates. But of course we had to expand a little bit as we've gone along. Now is anything that's year 2000 or after. And we kind of look across the scope of pop culture to recommend things. We try to recommend stuff that relates to the theme of our episode. And what do you have to recommend for this episode?
So I'm going to hem and haw a little bit and pull a Tom. I was debating where to go with this one. And at first I was going to go with a weird little movie that I'm sure most everyone has seen. It's 1967's, was it Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? Yep. Starring Gene Wilder. It just seemed a little too obvious, and I was just wanting something that had a little bit more of a personal touch. And I ultimately found one, which was 1982's movie directed by Barry Levinson, Diner, which centers around a group of young adults trying to figure out, how they're going to move forward with life, all the various marriage troubles and someone are getting married and dealing with all the various complexities of life that, these people have known each other since they were kids. I think it's Fells Point Diner is where they met on a regular basis. And I just remember the atmosphere. They did a great job of capturing what a shrine was like. And these folks would go there all the time. The various actors in the movie were Kevin Bacon, Steve Guttenberg, Mickey Rourke, Ellen Barkin, Daniel Stern, and I could probably name a couple others. Tim Daly, I think, was in it. So it's just a great list of actors, and they were outstanding. Ellen Barkin was great. She's dealing with some marriage problems, debating whether she's going to have an affair. The reason I ultimately chose it is twofold. This is set in Baltimore, and these folks are all just diehard Baltimore Colts fans. And I lived in Baltimore, right outside of Baltimore in DC, for a while. The thing about this movie that's really interesting, and I don't even think I realized it until we started thinking about choices for this episode, was this was the first movie that I thought of, or really the first thing I thought of when the Colts moved out of Baltimore.
Oh, yeah.
And because I remember, like, they did such a great job of portraying the fanaticism, how big of fans these were. And I think it was Steve Guttenberg's character wouldn't marry his fiance unless she passed a quiz on the Colts.
Right.
So that was the running joke throughout the whole thing. She's trying to study up so she can pass the quiz. And those are funny little gags, but it was just, there's a lot to like about the movie. But to me, what stood out is how crazy these people were for the Baltimore Colts. And it really made me think about what that must do to a city when a team leaves. I mean, of course, they have the Ravens back, and you and I hate them. But
Yeah.
I mean, that Baltimore Colts franchise was historic. Johnny Unitas, you can go through the list. I mean, this movie really does a great job of capturing the atmosphere of Baltimore and Baltimore Colts fans in the late 50s and early 60s. So I'm recommending that, and I'm giving it 4 out of 5 egg burritos with sour cream. I think it's a great movie.
My only disagreement with you is that I probably end up giving, if it's me, it's 5 out of 5, because I think that's one of the classic movies ever made. I think it's probably, Barry Levinson's a really famous director, but I think it's the best movie he's ever made, and it's for the reasons that you said. The scenes of them in the diner, though, do make me think of us, standing at London and Sons or sitting at the Eat Right, or whatever it might be, because they would be there late hours into the morning, and everybody there knew them, which that wasn't necessarily the case for us at London's, for example. But the first thing I always think of is the Colts test, and then I also always remember the popcorn scene with Mickey Rourke. And was Ellen Barkin the woman? I don't think so. I think it was a different girl who he got to grab his crank through a box of popcorn at the movies. But so see, it was a food movie all the way around.
Exactly.
But I agree. Great recommendation.
We can debate offline, and maybe I'll bump it up. I mean, we both try to hold the line a little bit on 5s. It was a tough decision. It is truly a great movie, and I haven't thought about it in a while. So I'm glad we did this topic, so it could make me revisit something that I hadn't thought about in a really long time.
Yeah, because that's not just a great food movie or diner movie. It's a great film. It really is one of the best, I think. Certainly one of the best he's done. Well, my recommendation for then is a movie from 1996. In my eyes, or at least in my recollection, it kind of started a little trend of what I would call food porn, where you got these films where the camera, they spent a lot of time lovingly photographing the preparation of food as part of the film. And they're not documentaries. And this is a narrative film about 2 brothers trying to basically save their little Italian restaurant. And it's called Big Night. And I didn't see it when it first came out. I watched it was probably years later on video, because I'd heard it was really good. And I think it may have gotten some nominations. I think it won some minor awards at film festivals and stuff like that. It was directed by Campbell Scott, but it starred Stanley Tucci, who also co-wrote the script, and Tony Shalhoub, who is famous actor for all kinds of stuff, but he's done a lot. He's Monk on TV and what have you. But they play two brothers that are trying to save their restaurant, and they come up with this concept of preparing this unbelievable meal as all like I think it's a 12-course meal or something, and they plan all of it painstakingly. And the idea is to sell it to people as an experience, not just sit down and get your food and leave. And those two together as brothers, they're great actors on their own, and they really work well together. I really did enjoy the movie. I'm not a big fan of watching long scenes of people preparing food. I'm certainly kind of, I won't say I'm alone in that, but there are a lot of people who do, because there's a whole network now since 1996 that's all they do is show people preparing food. But I think it kind of started that. I think it probably made the Food Channel possible. And Stanley Tucci now, of course, he does travelogues and lots of restaurant shows, and he's clearly a connoisseur and a real foodie. And I don't watch any of those. But Big Night is worth going back and watching again. It definitely, in my mind, was a good choice as a piece of pop culture that deals with this, how tied people get into food in specific restaurants, and the experience of eating with others. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 egg burritos with sour cream. The performance is probably rate of 4, but all of the food porn for me is like a 2. So I think it's a good average. But it is, having said that, I try not to recommend things I think suck, and I think this doesn't. I think it's a good movie, and I think it's worth seeing. And I don't know that people remember it very much at this point.
I never saw this one. You're probably tired of me saying that. I know of it, and I don't even know that I would go and watch it for the same reasons that you said. And it's really funny because I'll sit and watch like cooking shows on Food Network, but I'm not really paying attention to them. Like a movie, you actually want to watch them. And those two are both great actors, like you said. It's just I'm with you on the lack of food porn. Because when I'm watching them cook, I'm watching for them to mess up, like on Chopped and shows like that. I'm not really looking for great food.
I'm not a fan of reality TV in general. Don't like the food preparation shows. Don't like the competition shows at all. And those shows get turned on in my house, and then I usually find another room to sit down and read or something, because I'm not a fan. And again, Big Night is more than that. It's a narrative story, and the acting is really good, and there's more to it than just the preparation of food. But it does, to me, it gets weighed down a little bit with, I don't need 45 seconds of watching them, prepare a duck.
Well, I'm glad that we still have differences, because I could sit down and watch Chopped for hours and hours and hours.
All of those. I don't like the dancing shows. I don't like the cooking shows.
I hate the dancing shows.
I don't like the when We've Got Talent or whoever's got talent. Somebody's fucking got talent. I don't like that. I just can't watch those shows.
All right, so let's move on to our recommendations for now, which is anything from 2000 to the present. And you let me go first last time. I'm going to let myself go first again. So mainly because mine's a little short. I did not go with a movie. I had a couple ideas in mind. Decided ultimately to stick to my wheelhouse, which is songs. I was going to go with another Corey Brannon song because I really can't get enough of him. He has a great song from 2006 called Prettiest Waitress in Memphis. It is a nice, upbeat, fun song. It's everything that's good about Corey Brannon. Some great lyrics. He's talking about going to this restaurant when he's in town touring, meets this waitress. She says, like, I've been here for 20 years. He's like, I'll be here for a day. Just great little, and in the end, he leaves with her. So she ain't the prettiest waitress in Memphis anymore because she's leaving Memphis with him. Yeah. In the end, I went with one that's a little more interesting for me. So it's February 28, 2016 is the title of the song. It's from the same year, 2016, the album Noise Complaint by Koe Wetzel. And I've had a couple chats with Tom about him. He's a guilty pleasure. And this first album of his is truly a guilty pleasure because it is inappropriate, a little bit obnoxious, drunkenness. And it's not to celebrate that. In fact, I'm going to read a fairly lengthy excerpt from a review that summarizes why I chose it. I will do it in my own words first, so I'm not just stealing somebody else's thoughts. But the song is him and his buddies out drunk and driving around. You know, one of the lyrics is singing "La la la, let's pull over. I can't hold it. We turn the music up and let's play Critter Critter." I had to look up what Critter Critter is. Who is sober enough to take me to Taco Bell? So, and he does the Taco Bell thing over and over again. And at the very end, it's like he's almost sort of not singing anymore. It's almost like the ramblings of a drunk. It's like, I need a taco. I'm drunk for some tacos. Will somebody please take me to Taco Bell? So that's the connection to the song. Sorry, not to the song, to the topic. It's a fun song. His first album is a lot of fun. It rocks a little bit more than it's country. He definitely comes across as country. I've heard him on interviews. I think he's a talented songwriter who's growing, and he went from, you know, little roadhouse places to big arenas pretty quickly. And I tend to not like people like that, but he's also been heavily criticized because he isn't all that serious. Like, he is just who he is, which I think I appreciate a little bit more. I don't even know that he's trying to be famous by playing any persona. I just really think that this is him. But the reason I think that this connects so nicely with what Tom and I were discussing on this episode is this little blurb from a website called Saving Country Music. So it's the review of the album I just mentioned. And it's a little long, I apologize, but I'll go through it quickly. It's like, here we go. So, like most Americans and Texans, the road through the early and mid-20s is a rocky one, beset with temptations and wrong turns, still inferred by a religious and or moral foundation that hopefully doesn't get totally drowned out by debauchery, drugs, and alcohol, and eventually results in lessons learned, wisdom gained, and music that speaks to the deeper meanings and struggles of life when all those wild oats are sowed. So, summarizing, I mean, it's basically he's laying it all out as a 20-year-old about getting drunk and doing stupid stuff, and his music continues to mature. You know, so me standing in front of the counter person at London's and the phone ringing and going, if it's for me, I'm not here, thinking I'm hilarious, you know, dumb and in my 20s. But I'd like to think I got through all that. And, you know, sometimes it's fun to go through that, those lessons learned in life. And some of those best lessons are associated with these shrines that we've been talking about. So I would never call Taco Bell a shrine, but it got him what he needed on that night of drinking. So I'm going with February 28th, 2016 by Koe Wetzel.
So my choice for recommendation for now is another film. This one's from 2014. And it frankly is more food porn. But I think it's a better turn at using the preparation of food in the restaurant business. You still get some lingering shots over people making stuff over a hot stove kind of thing, but there's less of it, and there's more story. There's more about the individuals and the relationships of these individuals. And that movie is called Chef from 2014. It was written and directed by Jon Favreau, who's now famous basically for all the Marvel stuff and Star Wars stuff that he has done and continues to do. But he was a kind of an up and coming indie filmmaker for a long time, and he's done a lot of different stuff. It's one of the things I really respect about him is he's not afraid to try other genres, other ways of telling his stories. This movie stars John Leguizamo as basically his assistant and buddy. Robert Downey Jr.'s in it. It's got a huge cast. Scarlett Johansson is in it. Bobby Cannavale, who I think is a really funny, really good actor. He just had this giant list of stars who I think were willing to do this kind of small, almost independent film about a father who takes his son with him while driving a food truck from Miami to LA. And the backstory is the father is a relatively famous chef in LA who completely burns all his bridges because he goes off on a critic who criticized him. He loses his job, and he's basically got to start from scratch. And his starting from scratch is to fly across the country, see his ex-wife, buy an old food truck from, I guess, her husband, if I'm not mistaken, and then revamp it and put together a moving restaurant that cooks basically the best Cuban sandwiches you've ever seen in your life. And they do look good, I will say, on the screen. I love a good Cuban sandwich, and these things look fantastic. But he ends up bringing his son along with him and John Leguizamo as they travel from Miami to LA, where he's going to start this, that's going to be his business. His new wonderful restaurant is going to be on wheels. They stop in Austin and have amazing barbecue. They stop in New Orleans and eat at a couple of places. So there's a lot of food porn going on, but the story about this father and son who've been very estranged, and it's a younger kid, he's probably 12, maybe something like that. It's really a beautiful story. It's really touching, and it has a nice, hopeful ending. And it's about this guy kind of picking himself up again after getting really knocked in the dirt as a kind of an arrogant, talented chef. And it's a worthwhile movie to see for sure. I give it 4 out of 5 egg burritos with sour cream, even though there are a couple lingering shots on, high tops and grilling sandwiches, which I don't necessarily need to see. But it's a really fun movie. There's a lot of good humor in it, and I think Favreau, frankly, is a little underrated as an actor because he's so well known as a writer, director, producer, etc. Did have a runner-up, and I actually wanted to bring it up because I think you would really like this movie. Again, food pornish, and they're the first movie. It's a series of 4 movies starring Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon. The first one was called The Trip. Then there was The Trip to Italy, The Trip to Spain, and then The Trip to Greece. And the very first one starts out with Steve Coogan playing Steve Coogan, the actor, who in London in particular, in Britain, is very, very famous. And also relatively famous, I think, worldwide. Rob Brydon is a lesser known comedian and actor. I think they are friends in real life. In this first movie, they're friendly, but not great friends. But Coogan needs someone to fill in on a trip he's going to take where he's basically going to review and write about restaurants in the north of Britain. So he contacts Brydon at the last minute, who's willing to do it, and they drive around in Coogan's vehicle, and they go to all these really fancy restaurants. And as I said, there's a lot of shots of kitchens, and there's a lot of shots of waiters explaining what they're eating. But the best part of it is in between is Coogan and Brydon just riffing off of each other. And supposedly all of these movies are improvised, like 80 to 90% improvisation. There is a story, and it's not a documentary. There's a narrative involved, and it's not the same as their lives. So it's kind of surreal in that way. It's very meta. But the two of them with dueling James Bond impressions, with them just riffing off each other and singing silly songs, it is really, really funny. The Trip, which I rewatched before this episode, holds up really well. Made me laugh in the same places it made me laugh the first time I saw it. I didn't rewatch all 4 movies, but they're all like that. And I think you would get a kick out of them because they're really these 2 stand-up comics who are just kind of, they irritate each other. So they kind of make fun of each other, and they make fun of each other's impressions of different actors and what have you. But it's definitely worthwhile. If I was going to rate it, it'd probably be a 3 out of 5, which is why I went with Chef, which I think is a better film. But whether our listeners pick up on it and watch any of these trip movies, I would recommend that you watch the first one and see what you think, because I think you'd like all of them.
So you had to do it again. I use words like critter and getting drunk and going to Taco Bell, and you use concepts like meta.
Yeah, it's 4 letters, man. By the way, what the fuck does critter mean? I have no idea what that means.
It's some kind of strip poker game. I looked it up. I was like, what the hell is critter?
Yeah, never heard of it.
I think it's, I could be wrong, but yeah, no, it's not meta. I know that.
I guess it depends on how you use it.
I guess it is. All right, which takes us to our favorite part of the podcast, post facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Post facto, where we correct mistakes, fill in the blanks, and address listener questions or comments if we have them.
Yeah, and I'm going to steal. I won't steal one of yours. I'll go ahead and go first. I'll do both of mine first. Mine are a little bit more clarifications. One, I flat out just forgot to say. I did look it up, but I recommended a book last week in our sci-fi episode by Becky Chambers, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I had a backup, which was another of her books called A Psalm for the Well-Built. And I'd referenced they were both first books in new series. So just to close that loop, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is book one in the Wayfarers series. And A Psalm for the Well-Built is book one in Monk and Robot series. So the human character is a monk who makes tea and gives people advice. The other character is a robot. And then this is a little bit more just for clarity. I guess technically I was wrong. I also recommended Dan Simmons' great book, Hyperion. And I had said it was part of a trilogy and that there was another trilogy. In fact, it's a 4-book series called the Hyperion Cantos. The 4 books are Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion, Endymion, and Rise of Endymion. And it looks like he's released some prequels and sequels, maybe in some other languages. I saw that on Goodreads, but I'm not familiar with any of those, so I'm just sticking with these 4. So those are my post factos from last week. I'm sure I messed up somewhere else, but those are the ones I caught.
So this is the second time in this episode where we've talked about a series of 4 instead of a series of 3. What do you call that? Is it a quadrilogy? A quadrology?
4-book series, dude.
4-book series? All right. That seems
it's
fair.
so catchy. Why would you need to shorten that? Hold on. While you're looking, I will
Yes, look that up. So I have to just correct. It's not even correcting myself because you have to make an affirmative statement to correct it. When I was discussing the Mars trilogy and the 3 books about the colonization of Mars that I recommended so highly last episode, for the life of me, I could not remember the word terraforming. And that's when you are trying to change a planet so that it will sustain life of some sort, in this case, human life. And that word is used, I'd say conservatively, 4,000 times in those 3 books. And I could not remember the name terraforming to save my life. It's one of those situations where as soon as the episode was over, I remembered. I thought, oh, well, that's post facto.
And when you were talking, I was like, oh, I know this word. I know this word. And then I was out walking, listening to the episode after it was published. And as soon as it came up, and again, I feel like I do it in the same place all the time. There's some lady that probably lives in an apartment who's like, there's that crazy guy that just shouts stuff out. So I was like, terraforming. And I remembered it before you even said it. So when you put it on post facto, I was waiting for you. But yeah, like at the same place, I literally shouted it out. Terraforming.
I should have put it with an exclamation point when I wrote it down. Terraforming.
All right.
So anyway, that's
you want one more guess at what a 4-book series is?
I'm gonna a quadrennium.
You should have gone Greek. It's a tetralogy.
Oh, tetralogy. How did I not know that?
Yeah, how did you not know that?
I don't know how to speak Greek. I never would have guessed that. A tetralogy. I don't like that as much.
Yeah, I like quadrology.
Yeah, let's just make up words. The only other thing I wanted to bring up that relates to post facto is that, and we'll actually talk a little bit more in just a moment about it, but we have added a blog to our website, which is www.thirdsonginpodcast.com. And if I'm not mistaken, this morning we posted our first new essay or blog to the website. And it relates to a movie I wished I had recommended in an earlier episode. And some of the articles or essays that we post on the website are going to be in the form of post facto essays, things, books, movies, music, albums, whatever it may be that we've kind of thought of after the fact or didn't have room to fit into the episode. And the very first of those is posted as of now, right? I think it went up this morning. So this morning is Thursday. So by the time you hear this, it will be there. And I think it's a good place for us to talk about some of the other stuff that we just either gloss over or fail to remember because we're trying to cover a lot of ground each episode. So keep your eye out for the blog and let us know what you think.
Yep. And it is posted. I confirmed it. And our goal is to have a new one up every week from at least one of us and or from the archives. And we have a fairly extensive archives thanks to Tom over there.
Over here. So I think next are our famous playlist picks.
Yeah, let's get to it.
Who goes first?
Let me look and see what the choices are first. Oh, I'm gonna go first. Because I know all about your choice. So
I thought I'm surprised I haven't gotten shit about that yet, but yes, that seems
all
fair.
right. So I went with one, we talk about this. We ideally try to connect it as close as possible to the topic for the podcast. And I will say that this one's a bit of a stretch. My choice is a song called A Time for Wine. It's a single from 2022. I don't think it's made it onto any of his albums yet. He actually has a very limited discography so far, but the artist is Picos and the Rooftops. He's a young guy. If you listen to it, I think you will be impressed with the depth of his voice. He's got a voice that belies his age. And if you watch a video, he's this dude with a pretty full mullet, wears a ball cap all the time. And I feel like this song conveys, I know it's a fairly simple song, but it just conveys a maturity, I think, that are well beyond his years. And it's, my connection to the podcast theme is that you often drink wine with food. At least some people do. Tom and I often drink beer with food, but the wine is the connecting word for these. But it's much more of a breakup song. And Andy would be so impressed with how slow it is because it is slow. But what makes the song beautiful is a couple turns on phrases that he has. And it's got this saxophone piece that just runs through the whole song. It's really a beautiful song. And I like to quote lyrics, not sing them. I did that on one episode and that'll never happen again. But my favorite verse is, she remembers when she was so in love just to be told that she wasn't enough for a young man who didn't even know what he wanted to hold. She takes the blame and lives in doubt because I let her down. So the song is all about this woman who's dealing with a hard breakup, and you don't really find out that it was him all along. And I think you never quite see the guilt. So it's a sad but beautiful song. And I think that sums up 90% of the songs that I listen to. So, or sad and angry, and I don't know, but breakup songs do it. Sangry.
All right, that is a song that sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I've heard it. So I will be.
You better have. I put it on a playlist.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the title sounds really. I can't get the sound of it in my head. So
because you got Engine Joe stuck in your head
constantly since what, about 1998, possibly something like that. So speaking of Engine Joe, my playlist pick for this episode is Engine Joe from Barrel Chested by Slobberbone, which came out in 1997. You should be extremely proud of the fact that we are in the 8th episode of our 2nd season, and I just suggested Engine Joe for a playlist. This is the longest I've ever gone with one of our playlists where I haven't found some way to slide that in to fit whatever theme it was we were dealing with. This is one of my I know I say this a lot. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. I love this song. I loved it before my kids were born. And then it turns out it was one of the few songs that I could sing to them when they were babies, like a lullaby, because I couldn't remember any other lullabies. So all of my kids have been imprinted with Engine Joe lyrics in their head. They all know the song by heart. All I can say is listen to it. It's a fantastic song. It really is about a shrine, because it's about a barbecue joint opened up by a guy who used to be a Cracker Jack mechanic who, hurt himself and could no longer work on cars. which sounds kind of like a silly thing to write a song about, but man, they pull it off. And I'm very proud it took me this long to add it, but then again, I feel like it should have been the first song on the very first playlist we ever did for this podcast.
I don't want to give you credit, but I will. That was a nice job holding off.
See?
And I can only imagine how many times you're like, Engine Joe would work. Oh, wait.
Every time.
No, I'll wait.
Every single time.
And
In
now,
fact, let me just add this, because when we did our songs, happy songs, if you recall, the way I formulated that was songs that made me feel good, and mainly about my family. They reminded me of each of my kids and my wife and, you know, that kind of thing. And after that episode posted, and I was telling my son Jake what we did, because he wanted to know, you know, what the topic was or something, and I explained that we made that playlist, and he said, "So you picked Engine Joe, right?" And I almost burst into tears. I was like, "No, how could I forget Engine Joe?" He just shook his head and walked out of the room.
and I guess I'm just going to have to pick it for another topic, although I don't know how. There's a song that as soon as you said Engine Joe and the barbecue, I thought about the song. It's about a guy that works in the kitchen at a diner-like place, and he's in love with the waitress, and she's in love with a guy who he never names by name. He calls him something throughout. It's going to drive me nuts. It'll
Sounds
be
like
on.
post facto material, baby.
It does, but now, I mean, I'm talking seriously going to drive me crazy. I got to find that before.
All right. While you're looking it up, we are about ready to wrap up this episode. I mentioned a couple of things previously, but we want to finish up to remind everybody that we have an email at thirdsongin@gmail.com. Please email us with suggestions, critiques, concerns, food shrines, whatever you can think of. There are also places to comment on a lot of the podcast platforms that we use. For example, Spotify gives you a place to comment as well. We would really like you to follow us on whatever podcast platform you use. Rate and review us if you can. Follow and review our playlists where you can. We have 2 music playlists: Third Song In Season 1, Third Song In Season 2. Those playlists are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music. You can find them in any one of those places. Please follow those. Let us know what you think of the playlists themselves. If you're new to our podcast, take a look at the list from Season 1 and again, email us. Let us know what you think. We also have a website that Chris has basically built from scratch. I've had very little to do with it, but I love it. It's thirdsonginpodcast.com. And I'm going to make you stop looking up that song and tell us a little bit about the website.
I got it. So I'll talk about it after this. So website has all of our recommendations. Well, I take that back. All of our 5 out of 5 egg burrito recommendations. So the top of the top. We are adding blogs as we talked about it. We'll have a new one each week, adding in some fun pictures. We have a as mentioned by, which right now is that what we call it?
As mentioned, yes.
As
Correct.
mentioned. It's a good thing I developed the website and remember all these details. But yeah, check it out. You can listen to episodes right from the webpage. There's a list of where all the playlists are and the podcasts if you want to listen to it on the various services, and they're on all 4 that we know of: Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and Amazon. And as Tom said, it continues to grow every day. Keep looking for new media to put on there and new ways to connect with our audience. And we've got a couple emails from a guy named Jonathan from Armpit, and he's made some recommendations. We'd welcome Jonathan's and Tom's and anyone else who wants to write in. You can write us right from the website. And the name of the song is Screen Door by Adam Carroll. He's looking out the screen door where your face comes in the light. You said you love the tool pusher because he bought you a ring. So he always calls her boyfriend the tool pusher. So that has no relevance to this episode other than you said something, made me think of it. I probably should have used that one as my choice because it's definitely more upbeat than Time for Wine.
I do know that song. I like that song.
But I love both songs and only make good recommendations for the playlist.
Absolutely.
Despite what Jonathan from Armpit, Texas or whatever
That
says.
son of a bitch, Jonathan, I'm telling you right now. So that is third song in with Chris and Tom. Thank you for listening.
Terraforming.
Terraforming.